It's our pleasure, as Sam mentioned, to be launching the research today. I'll have a couple of QR codes. You can have your phones out. We'll give you some links that you can download some information. As Sam mentioned, it's the first time we're doing that. And so as we talk about the trends and the data that Sam shared with us today, I want to just go behind it a little bit and dig in and talk a little bit about so what. What are the various things that we're dealing with, and how do we gain the context that we need to do this? And as Sam introduced, the whole premise or the communication, the storyline of what we're going to talk about today is this gap. And Sam covered it briefly. We'll dig into it a little bit more. But this gap is both a danger and an opportunity. And we need to dig in a little bit. And this misalignment that we're seeing, this shift or this gap between the values and preferences of the next generation attendees and even many of our current attendees and the exhibitors and sponsors' priorities, particularly when it comes to this conversation where many of them, most of them, the majority of them are new to their role. There's a lot of shifts within the marketing organizations as well. Exhibit management prior to the pandemic primarily reported into sales organizations. During the pandemic, it shifted and moved into marketing organizations. So the CMO is much closer to this investment. So there's different conversations that we need to have as we look at measuring these priorities and meeting the marketing playbook as we move forward. As I mentioned, you get your phones out. This is a great example of kind of digging into who they are. I think this is a great illustration. But as we look at who they are, as Sam mentioned, I want to back up just a little bit. And this is the first QR code. If you missed our first quarter study, grab this QR code. This will take you to the full first study, and then you can just ignore me the rest of the time and dig into next generation event goers. This is a good summary of who these folks are. And I was actually sitting at dinner last night having conversations that reinforced this significantly with some really smart folks that just reinforced some of this conversation as they are going to share later this afternoon. But this generation that's younger, that is more female, we saw the mix prior to the pandemic is 80-20, male-female in our events. And it shifts depending on industry for sure. But interestingly, when we go into the next generation event goer, it's 34% of that group are women. So the future is more female. We are moving into a more diverse direction. And yet, as you'll see, very few changes are being made in programming and facilitating these connections at events. We need to understand that this shift is big, and we need to change the way we've been doing things to reach the next generation and the diversity and equity and inclusion that we've all been looking for. But I'll hone in on one bubble there, and that's this conversation around social impact. You're going to see this come up a couple of times where we actually believe, because of cost and inflationary pressures, that exhibitors are overlooking some very core areas, including sustainability, when it comes to their priorities, where this is not an initiative for the next generation. These are table stakes. This is not a conversation about whether it's important or not, or looking at the next board meeting how we're doing on our DE&I or sustainability initiatives. It's a conversation that this generation says, I don't want net zero, I want regenerative policy. And that's a conversation that we're going to be struggling with for years to come. So this is the background of who we want our exhibitors and sponsors to help us engage, help bring in, and put their marketing dollars towards. But these gaps that we're talking about have some strong issues that we need to deal with. The expectations, as we mentioned, between what they feel is important and their satisfaction on those things. And we'll dig into some interesting threads here in just a minute on that. Their budgets against inflation. What you'll see as you get the full exhibitor report at the end of my presentation, you'll see that throughout there's conversations that all come back to cost. You're all dealing with this. You're having conversations with yourselves, with exhibitors, with everyone involved. Should we raise prices? What do we do? There's pressures from every side when it comes to this information. And it's, frankly, a challenging balance between reaching the next generation, looking and grasping new opportunities, and balancing these realities that inflation is bringing us. And then this last piece, these new exhibitors. What a better time to come out of this and say, this is an opportunity. This is both a challenge. I've talked to many of you in our focus groups that share this as a challenge because there is no we've done it that way before. This isn't about having first-time exhibit programs for companies. It's about having first-time exhibit programs for these managers. As they come to your organization, their company may have been exhibiting for 10 years, but they are new, and we need to think differently in how we communicate with those new exhibitors. Focusing in on this gap of importance versus satisfaction that we've discussed, I want to hone in just a little bit on what's highlighted, particularly around leads, because it's a conversation we keep pulling the thread on. One of the things that's interesting underneath this, and it's pointed out in the full report, is that if we close the gap of satisfaction in even one area, whether it's on product launch, on brand impact, or on leads, if we, across the study, when we look at satisfaction higher in one area, their sentiment across the rest of the study rises by over 20% on almost every question. So this isn't about solving everything, it's about focusing in on the objectives of your exhibitors and making sure that we can satisfy some of those gaps that they're finding. Digging a little deeper into the conversation around where they're spending and what they're doing, you can see here, this is the most oatmeal slide I have. There's no change in the way that they're spending dollars. This is a conversation around fixed costs versus discretionary spending, and you can see that they haven't made much shift. But when we look at this in context of what the next generation wants and sees, we should start seeing shifts. We should be seeing focus on design. We should be seeing focus on promotion and the way that we communicate what is happening. And we need to offer incentives and opportunities for our exhibitors to drive that. Sam mentioned the conversation around location. You might be wondering if there's any DMOs in the room. Is my city on the list? That's really not the focus. As we dig underneath the information, what we find is, once again, here comes our inflationary warning, that the conversation really is around costs. The location and the drivers that they put in there are really around travel costs, accessibility, et cetera. There are some safety and various concerns with some of our larger cities that have been ongoing, but this kind of gives you an unpacking of what's happening, but a lot of this, again, relates to the costs that are driving. I mentioned that we need to be focused on the conversation around sustainability. We've done some work to understand that across our surveys, we looked at about 200 of our largest shows. As much as our associations and organizers talk about sustainability as an initiative, we only found in our research that only 6 of them actually had event sustainability policies to share. I think there's an opportunity there for us to drive training and information and drive more conversation around this important topic. Value creation. Want to dig in a little bit here to what Sam talked about. One of the interesting things that we find throughout the report, we'll begin to pull some various threads that talk about the difference in the sizes of exhibitors. And it's not quite the way that you would imagine. Often we focus our exhibitor advisory groups, et cetera, around our largest exhibitors, and they have the largest voice. But you'll find there's quite different realities around value creation for these groups. For instance, the larger your exhibitor is, the more it's about brand impact. And we've all seen the smaller exhibitor that comes in. I was one of those as a startup years ago. You go to an event and you need leads. And you need leads to survive, to be there for the next year, et cetera. Very different processes, and we need to think differently about the way we communicate. There is no one size fits all. There's a number of points in the study about sponsorship, but I want to focus in on this one. There's a conversation that we've had for a long time about creating a catalog of sponsorship opportunities that includes something at very, very entry level. I'll just say this very carefully. There is no value long tail in that conversation. In fact, in doing some analysis, we found that the average sponsorship under $1,000 costs you over $1,500. Seems to be a problem. So that entry-level sponsorship point, the real value creation is between that $1,000 and $50,000, and we see that the majority are sitting in there. So wrapping up, so what? What does all this information tell us? It tells us a couple of things. Fernando's going to come and talk more in depth about much of this, but it really isn't about the quantity conversation, these conversations around how many leads they can get. It's about looking at quality and understanding the objectives of our attendees so that we can design events that match the values of our attendees with the objectives of these partners and begin to close the gaps. So you will be getting the QR code at our booth out here. You can download the report, and thank you for your time.